If you did this in a movie theatre and had the actual explosion force from C4 going off, you'd have to have a big sign that says, "Put in your earplugs now."
Remind me not to come to your movie theater. Jesus Christ.
Hi, I'm Paul Worsey, and I'm a professor of explosives engineering.
And I'm Tassilo, Baur, a special effects supervisor in Los Angeles.
Today we're going to review explosions in TV and film from a scientific perspective
And a filmmaking perspective.
Desperado. In the guitar case, we see some modern era grenades, but unfortunately they're rolling around. And that's not the sort of thing I'd want to do with grenades, is have them rolling around, bouncing into each other. And I personally wouldn't throw a guitar case full of grenades at my girlfriend. These look like wire-round grenades inside those casings, rather than a segmenting grenade. The original grenades were pineapple in design, and they were supposed to break up into large chunks, and that was the idea on them. And these large chunks were propelled out and killed people. Modern grenades are designed to give a lot of fragments, very small fragments, which are termed frag. The term shrapnel is usually used accidentally instead of frag in a lot of films, and shrapnel actually is ball bearings, and there was a shell called the shrapnel shell, and it was invented by Mr. Shrapnel. So in a shrapnel shell, the ball bearings are there, and they're blown everywhere by the explosives. Frag comes from a steel casing that's broken. It's turned into pop metal by the detonation wave, and then these small pieces fly everywhere. They're sharp, do a lot of damage. In a lot of movies, somebody will throw a grenade, and you'll see a huge fireball, and that's not really realistic unless they set off a propane tank that's just off frame. A frag grenade, when it goes off, will be a puff, a rather large bang, but you definitely won't see a lot of flame.
To create that effect, they would have placed explosives specifically with a view toward causing that wall of fire. And the grenades, of course, are simply props that the stunt performers on the ground react to. To create this explosion, they probably would have used gasoline lifted by charges placed between the two buildings. You can even see in the top right corner part of what seems to be the bag that the gasoline was likely poured into. Then there's a smaller explosion where they're flung away from it, which is probably done with an air ramp or something to allow them to jump the way they do. And then we see the wide shot of the two main actors against a fireball. And it's done very cleverly in that there's really good protection for them, and of course it's on a long lens to compress the distance between them and the fireball. The fireball is actually between the two buildings, so it's basically going up like a wall instead of billowing out like a mushroom. So other than the radiant heat, there's really no risk to them, and they're good actors, so they don't flinch, they carry it off, and it makes a great shot.
Batman.
Meow.
In this sequence, we're seeing a lot more complex effects than just the explosion. First off, the Catwoman performer punches through the metal door to the cabinet, and the metal door to the cabinet obviously would have to be prepared in such a way that the performer could punch through it safely and it would look like it was supposed to do when it broke. This sort of thing is what's called a breakaway, and frequently it's made so you can replace it quickly so you can do multiple takes. Once she rips it open, we then see her break the gas line and gas escaping, and there's a sign there that says gas, but just to show us visually what's happening, there's a substance streaming out of the broken line. At the time the film was made, that was probably Freon, a component of air conditioning systems. Unfortunately, that has ozone-destroying properties. So currently, we would probably use something like liquid nitrogen or liquid CO2 to create a visible jet of gas. Then we see her put spray cans into the microwave and start it, which then appears to trigger the larger explosion.
Whether this is realistic or not, I think it looks really, really good, and I've seen a lot of gas explosions, and they can look quite spectacular. This is what happens in people's houses sometimes, that the gas escapes and it builds up in the house, and it builds up slowly to the lower end of the explosive limit, and then there's a spark of some sort, and that's all it takes. I would expect personally to see a little bit more of a blue color to it. When you do combustion, if you're on the lean side, it tends to be a little bit blue, and if you've got too much fuel in there, it goes on the yellow side.
To manage the risk in this explosion, they used very cleverly a series of different ones. First off, you see the real performers in a configuration in front of a building which probably had no explosives in it to set up the geography of the shot. Then you see an over-the-shoulder shot with what is very likely a stunt performer as Catwoman, which is convenient because she happens to be wearing a costume which lends itself to her that. And then later you see a much wider shot where there are no performers in the proximity to the explosion at all, which they can have a full force explosion. So they go from no explosion to smaller explosion to a huge explosion. And by cutting them all together, it creates the illusion that the performers are right next to it. The over-the-shoulder is clearly shot with a very long lens with a view toward compressing the distance between the explosion and the performers very successfully. It also makes the shot more dramatic. The other thing that they will tell stunt people to do is move a little bit or they'll think you're a dummy. Humans are looking for human characteristics. That's why they'll very often have the stunt performer make some sort of small movement leading into or reacting to the explosion, even if it's minimal, just to show you that it's not a dummy.
In a real explosion, okay, there's going to be a shock wave, and that will cause things to move. Okay, I have some footage underground where we have our explosive camp, and for high school students, and the campers are there, and we shoot dynamite about 100 foot down the tunnel. All that force comes towards them. What it'll do is they'll blow their hair all over the place on the girls, and their pant legs on everybody will flap backwards and forwards. And sometimes if you use enough, it'll knock off hard hats if they're in just the right place. So it's quite an experience.
The Dark Knight. This was a real building demolition done for the movie, actually on a real building that was scheduled to be demolished in any case.
We blow up a lot of different things in this film, and with our major explosions, I was determined to do one of them for real.
It's very important as special effects people that we keep current and enhance our skills to the degree that we can, but it's also important to know our limits. Building demolition people shouldn't do special effects, and special effects people shouldn't do building demolitions. It's apples and oranges. In this case, you have two separate disciplines working together to create this overall effect.
We're working in very close conjunction with Chris and his crew. So they'll have their special effects going off, and it won't interrupt our demolition charges.
On the demolition side, I can tell you exactly what happened. The windows start to reverberate and shake, and that happens roughly 5 seconds before the building actually starts to fall. And those reverberations are made by detonating cord going off inside the building. The actual concrete columns inside that building will each have had, say, 3 or 4 explosive charges, which are actually drilled into the concrete. Then they're wrapped with chain link fence and geotech.
All of this material is to prevent any debris from flying out of the building when we blast it.
So that stops all that concrete flying everywhere. And when you blast that pillar, what you want to do is you want to turn that concrete into its original ingredients, which is lime, sand, and aggregate. And what happens is it gets blown off the rebar. And the rebar inside the concrete is just like a string, and it gives the concrete tensile strength and bending strength. But soon all that concrete is gone, the actual rebar gets pancaked.
The debris is handled very effectively in this particular sequence because we want the talent to be close enough to the explosions to tie it together without subjecting them to a great deal of potential risk. As you notice, before things get really serious, the talent is all inside the bus, which probably has had the windows replaced with something that doesn't break, some sort of polycarbonate or something. So they're really well protected in there, not only from debris, but from sound. As Dr. Worsey pointed out, all the stuff is contained by the chain link fence and all these precautions that are taken. You don't get that debris flying off. So what we supply is lightweight debris that's controllable, it flies off in a visually spectacular way, and enhances the effect. From looking at some of the behind-the-scenes images, you can see that the debris mortars were actually, as is common, firing pieces of cork and lightweight debris, and the metal drums were probably filled with a combination of gasoline and something else to make it more visually interesting, which then creates the fireball.
And with all those explosions going on, he doesn't lose it for one iota. Just the perfect performance.
You can make the actors as safe as they can possibly be, but if they don't feel safe, it's going to affect their performance. Joker doesn't care about any of this. He's completely nonchalant, and if he hadn't felt safe, I don't think his performance would have been the same. Breaking Bad.
You got one part of that wrong. This is not meth.
In this scene, he's using mercury fulminate, or fulminate of mercury. And you might ask, what is that?
What is this? Fulminated mercury. A little tweak of chemistry.
Mercury fulminate basically is made by taking mercury, mixing in nitric acid, and the other ingredient is moonshine. And when you make this stuff, it's very interesting. You need lots of moonshine because it steadies your nerves as well as being an actual component. What we see in this TV clip is fairly accurate because mercury fulminate is very, very sensitive to shock, sparks and heat and things like that. In fact, it was deemed too dangerous after a while to put in blasting caps, and it was replaced by lead stiffenate. When the explosion occurs, you may ask, how come the guys inside survived? Well, the actual fact is that buildings are not very strong compared to humans. So what you see is the windows blowing out probably at less than 1 psi, whereas you're not going to get permanent hearing damage until you get up to about 5 psi. The net result of this is you're going to get a lot of bang inside the building, but there's not enough pressure to totally rip it apart, but enough to pop out the windows and enough for the people inside to survive, although they'll have a slight headache and ringing in their ears, as you see on the clip.
Actually, the explosion's very carefully and cleverly done. It's done in a series of cuts, but the first one is the actual actor in slow motion throwing the packet, and then we see what looks like a small spark explosion, which gives a cutting point to the outside of the building where we have debris mortars, simulated glass, the stunt people down below, and a mechanical effect of releasing what looked to be fake air conditioning units. So altogether, it gives a very violent and extended point of view from several angles, which makes the explosion much more dramatic.
And one part on the building, it looks like all the windows blow out on the one side, but at the corner, it appears that corner window on the other side doesn't blow out, and it's the painted side of the building. That window really should have gone out, but we got a lot of quick film cuts here, so it gives the effect it needs to.
Rush Hour.
Ooh, that's tight. That's beautiful. That's nice. What's that?
That's C4.
That's C4?
That's C4.
okay, C4's a pretty standard explosive. I got plenty in my magazines back at the university. It's actually white in color, but the packing's what's colored. It's generally an olive drab, which kind of looks like a greasy, slimy dog turd, unfortunately. In reality, shooting C4 with a handgun isn't going to set it off because C4's relatively insensitive. But that 1 in a million shot where they actually hit the firing device, it could dump that electricity into the blasting caps and thereby set off the C4. With the charge in the back in the trunk, it's not realistic for it to be flipped. It's more likely the whole back end of that car would be totally blown away with 10 pounds of C4 because it's contained in the massive amount of pressure and gas that would be inside it. The front end would survive, the rear end would be blown off, but you'd expect also for a lot of the body panels to be blown off, which you usually see in explosion events like that. Not something that goes flying into the air. And we wouldn't see so much of a fireball, even though it's night. But 10 pound of C4's good hefty charge.
From a movie standpoint, basically 0 damage is acceptable. Even cracking those windows or something like that is considered something you really want to avoid. We're using low explosives where it's all bark and very, very little bite. We want it to be way cool looking without all the, as he described, body panels and things like this flying off in an uncontrolled manner. In this case, it looks like black powder and gasoline, either that or naphthalene, depending on the circumstances. Naphthalene is a form of mothballs. It's essentially a solid hydrocarbon, and the combustion of it, if it's done in a special effects context, looks a lot like gasoline. And the idea of the car flip itself, that could be accomplished by creating a separate explosion, probably in a cylindrical mortar, directed so that a piston or plunger is forced out the bottom. The car then is forced up into the air. You're talking about the flip being created by something other than the explosion that causes the visual effect.
It appears that they've got concrete barriers in there to contain the vehicle.
Right. This is a problem. You have to plan for not only if the effect goes the way you want it to, but also if it doesn't. Where does a vehicle loaded with explosives go if it doesn't function the way you expect it to? And that K-rail there is probably there to catch it if that were to happen. But to me, what really sells this entire sequence is his reaction at the end. That dance of jubilation after he's had all that trouble makes the whole scene every bit as good as the explosion.
Yeah, man, and I wish I had those moves.
Filmmaking is the art of creating an illusion in the minds and the hearts of the audience. Whether that corresponds to what would really happen or not isn't important. It's important that the audience believes what you're doing enough to be entertained, and that's what we're striving for.
It's kind of like shooting a firework display. What you're there for is to wow the public, not to be a thump junkie and get all the entertainment yourself.